I want to talk about multi-dog households. Okay. So the thing about living with multiple dogs is a lot of people will say it's easier with multiple dogs than just one dog. And that's true to a certain point. I like to tell people, when you get your first dog, basically you have to rearrange your schedule. You rearrange your life when you bring in your first dog. When you bring in your second dog, you basically are teaching the dog how to live in your household. So they have to rearrange their schedule to live in your household. So it's easier in that aspect, but having multiple dogs does tend to create problems, the same as having multiple children. When you've got one child, you don't worry about the fighting. You don't worry about teaching each of them to share. You don't worry about, squabbles. You don't have to worry about giving each of them individual time and stuff like that, jealousy. But when you bring another one in, or when you have another baby, you have to worry about all of that stuff. And it's exactly the same with dogs. When you bring in your second dog, a lot of people, when they bring in the new puppy, a lot of times the older dog is just absolutely smitten and happy, and they play together and they have a grand old time. But things usually start to slip when that puppy becomes about 6 months old. And the reason for that is because the puppy has started going through puberty. And with puberty, that brings a whole set of problems, a whole new set of problems. Because this puppy is starting to learn how to push. And what I mean by push is pushing its boundaries. Dogs really learn by elimination, so to speak. So the way they learn is they will push to see how far they can get away with. And they do that with people, and they do that with other dogs. So when you bring in another dog, a new puppy, when they start going through puberty, they'll go through puberty whether they've been spayed or neutered or not. So when they start going through puberty and they start to push the adult dog in a way that they never did before, a lot of times you'll see squabbles. You'll see in some cases you'll see serious fighting, especially if you have bully breeds that are typically when it's acceptable for them to be dog aggressive, such as bull terriers, pit bulls, things like that. And so that is something, if you don't really know a lot about dog behavior, to be able to read it, in my opinion, that's very important. I used to tell people, before you get a dog, learn about dog training. And after I had my first bull terriers, now I say learn more about dog behavior and dog body language before you bring in a dog, because it helps so much. So that's one of the biggest problems with owning multiple dogs. A lot of times you'll have resource guarding over people or food or toys. And that's not to say all dogs, but most dogs, they are going to butt heads at some point in their lives. So a few tips for people who are deciding to bring in a second dog or even a third dog, whether it's a puppy or another adult. Even if they've grown up together, never leave them alone together, because dogs have dynamics the same as humans do. So, you can absolutely love your husband or your wife or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your children, and just one day they do something that really gets on your nerves and you get upset, you get angry, you yell, you get into a big old argument. But with dogs, argument usually includes teeth. So, that, especially if you have bull breeds, Bully breeds, they really do tend to be a lot more stubborn, and they really do tend to be a lot more set in their ways, and they're not as flexible. They're not really, I mean, obviously, all bully breeds have their own personalities. You have some that are more passive than others. You have some that are more outgoing, more bold, more obviously. But I mean, in general, as a whole. But you can get little dogs like that too. You can get, I mean, it's extremely common to get snot-nosed little, chihuahuas who think they own the universe. So if you just take precaution, for the most part, you really do. I mean, I've had dogs before where they grew up together for years and years and years. They never got into any arguments. We never had a problem. And then all of a sudden one day it was just, somebody took a snap at somebody else, and there was a big problem there. So just always, if you're going to leave the house, use crates. Crates are the best. If you are like me and you have two bully breeds who, butt heads, invest in what's known as a break stick. And this is basically a stick that is used to safely pry a dog's mouth off of another dog. It doesn't hurt them. It doesn't cause any pain. You just basically wedge it in, and you open their mouths up so you can get dogs to release. Because, like with my two, they'll get into what I call squabbles, which to me are absolutely nothing. They make a lot of noise. They are like bears, and they stand up on their hind legs, and they kind of wrestle and clank their teeth together, and sound like they're possessed by demons and that they're going to kill each other. And anybody else would walk in and see that and say, "Oh my gosh, your dogs are going to kill each other." And I'm like, "Nah, they're fine. They're just being assholes." And I just, yell at them and tell them, "Hey, knock it off, you guys." And they're like, "Oh, all right." And, they do that every couple of weeks over something. Somebody gets a little bit too rough with somebody else, and they don't like that, causes pain while they play, and they say, "Hey, knock it off." So, with multi-dog households, you really do have to work just as hard at balancing your time between them. Like with my dogs, I know I never do something with one and not the other. If one goes, the other one always goes. So a good thing that I absolutely love about having two dogs is that a lot of times the second dog, like if you bring, the second dog will pick up on things that the first dog already understands a lot faster. The second dog is usually trained a lot quicker than your first dog. So what I always recommend to people when they get a dog, and like say that if they get a puppy or they adopt a young dog from the shelter, and they are thinking, "Oh my gosh, it would be so great if they had a playmate, and I would just absolutely love it if I could have two puppies playing and wrestling around and having a good time together." And while that sounds cute and it sounds like, the best idea in the whole wide world, I always tell people to wait until your first dog is fully trained and has no issues that you want to work on. Because if you bring in an untrained puppy or an untrained dog when your first dog isn't fully trained or has issues, that second dog, like I said, is just going to pick it right up, and then all of a sudden you have two dogs you have to deal with that has the same problem. And they'll feed off of each other. So when you have your first dog, if you bring in a second dog, if your second dog has any issues as far as training, like young puppies who aren't potty trained, sometimes your adult dog will pick up a little bit on that and will actually start to slip, and you'll start to feel like, "Oh my gosh, he's slipping, he's not listening to me the way that he was." And this is pretty common. It's because, they learn from each other, they feed off of each other, they mimic each other because they're social creatures. So it's really important that your first dog already have the knowledge, and you already have the control over the first one, so that when you're trying to deal with the second one, it's a lot easier because your first one already knows what to do. You're not trying to deal with two dogs at once, and it is hard. For me, I kind of choose my own hours. I work odd hours. I don't have a 9 to 5 job that I go to. I can take my dogs to work with me if I need to, or if I want to. So I'm with my dogs almost 24/7, and it's still hard to try and train two dogs. It is still very difficult, and it is something that even though I'm perfectly capable of doing, I would not want to do. And I do consider myself a pretty advanced owner, and it's not something that I would ever want to do, and it's not something I would suggest anyone do. It's the same for bringing two puppies home at once. Don't do it. Don't do it. As much as it's as great as it sounds, I mean, unless you have a huge family willing to work with the two puppies, don't do it. It's so difficult. I mean, it's not that it's not doable. It is very much doable. It's just very, very hard, and it takes longer. It takes a lot longer. Your average puppy will pick up on potty training within a few weeks. If you have two puppies and it's just, say, you and your partner, or you and your sister, or just you, or just a small family of 3, you, your husband, and your child or your kids, it can take up to several months for both puppies to fully get it. And the reason for that is just because, as soon as one starts to do a bad behavior, the other one is most likely going to follow suit and start doing that, even if they had just been successful at it. So, yeah, I don't recommend having two young dogs in the same household, unless, some breeds and some dogs, they pick up on things really well, and they're just awesome dogs. They're just those dogs that, are perfect. Everybody's had one of those, I think, but I mean, it's rare. It's not the norm. So, but multi-dog households, they can be a lot more fun. They can be a lot more interesting, but you do get double the problems. You do have less time to spend with each of them. Like with mine, the whole reason that I got my female was because my male just absolutely loves other dogs. He loves to be around other dogs, and I thought to myself, you know what, I'm ready for another dog. I can handle two dogs. I've handled two dogs in the past, and I want another dog. So I went and I got a puppy for me, and I got a puppy for him, and it was fun. It was great, and I thought, oh, wonderful, they're going to keep each other entertained all day long, and no. It wasn't that they were keeping each other entertained. It was suddenly I had two dogs staring at me for attention. And that was like, are you kidding me? I got you to keep you entertained. Why do you need me to keep you both entertained now? So that's exactly how it usually goes. As I'm sure some breeds they completely say, fuck you to the owner and just go off and do their thing. But I know with mine, it was, as soon as I brought in the second one, I had two dogs needing my attention, and I had two dogs pestering me for attention. And even though we had a huge toy box full of doggy toys, it didn't matter. It didn't matter because they didn't want to play with them by themselves or together anyways. They just wanted my attention. So I try to also tell people to be realistic. While it may seem like a good idea to bring in a second dog for your first dog, like I hear a lot of people say, you know, well, I work all day, he's home alone, he's bored, I'll get another dog to keep him entertained. That's not a good idea, because like I was just saying, more often than not it happens where you get a second dog and you think they're going to keep each other entertained, and what really happens is now suddenly you have two dogs looking at you to keep them entertained. And if you work all day, you know, it's just not a good idea, because now suddenly you have two dogs that you're feeling guilty about who you can't keep entertained, as opposed to just the one who would have been a lot easier. So that's something else. I never suggest you get a second dog solely because of your dog. Just because your dog loves all other dogs doesn't mean that you should get another dog. If you're not the one wanting another dog, if you're not ready for a second dog, because they do cost a lot more. The cost of having two dogs literally does double. I mean, you got to get the shots and the licenses and the food and the bedding and the collars and the toys. You know, you can't just have one collar and one leash and everything like that. So the cost really does double. And if you can't, thanks, bud. If you're having trouble affording one dog, then you shouldn't get a second dog. So really ask yourself, do I have the time for two dogs? Do I have the energy for two dogs? Do I have the money for two dogs? Do I have the space for two dogs? Do I want two dogs? Because just because your dog enjoys having other dogs around to play with doesn't mean that it's right for you to have a second dog. I mean, you know, I made sure to wait. I was itching for another puppy when Caesar was a year old. Mine now right here, when he was a year old. But I didn't think he was ready. Even though I was ready and I wanted to take on another one, he wasn't ready because he was still having food aggression issues that we were trying to deal with. And I thought, no, this is not what I want to bring in. I do not want to bring in a puppy and have two dogs with food aggression. So I made sure to wait until he was just about almost 2 years old. Maybe he was around, yeah, he was around 2 years old when I brought her in. And by that time, he had calmed down a lot. He had gotten over his food aggression. We had a handle on it. You know, we didn't have any problems anymore. And when I brought her in, he started to regress a little bit, and his food aggression did start to come up a little bit again. And he did have a little bit of problems walking on lead with her because she would pull, so he would try to pull. And so, you know, I had to kind of deal with training two dogs for a little bit, you know, because he still already had his training, so it wasn't like starting from scratch with him. But I did have to remind him here and there of the rules. And I did have to go back to using NILF, Nothing in Life is Free training with him again, and starting, you know, I just made sure to start from scratch because I was starting from scratch with her anyways, and he picked up on it, you know, it wasn't like he was learning from scratch again. So, it is a challenge, it is rewarding, it is something that you shouldn't just do on a whim, just because, you know, you see a cute puppy. If you're bringing in another adult dog, make sure that your dog and the new dog are compatible, have them meet somewhere. Make sure you have areas that each dog can get away from each other and have their own space, so nobody feels, you know, pressured, nobody feels pushed, nobody feels pestered. Make sure you have enough toys for everybody. I like to make sure that with my dogs and toys, to make sure that my dogs don't try to guard any toys that they feel is theirs and nobody else's. I make sure to work on that. NILF, like I was saying, Nothing in Life is Free training is something that I think is a necessity. I don't think there's any reason not to use NILF training for any dog, whether it be a dog that's 12 years old, nearly blind, just coming into your house, or it's a 10-week-old puppy. I think NILF is a perfect training for every dog, and I think you should use that from the very beginning of each dog that you bring in. Every time you bring in a new dog, start NILF over. But make sure, you know, if you're in a family, make sure everybody's on board with a second dog. Make sure you have time to devote to training the second dog when you bring them in. And, you know, like I said, first dog, you create a schedule around them. You kind of create your life around that first dog. When the second dog comes in, and they can fit right into that little niche. So, thanks for watching, and I hope I helped with some insight into anybody thinking about getting a second or even a third dog. Because even with the third dog, dynamics still change between everybody. So, good luck.